When I told my family I was donating my entire fortune to charity instead of leaving it to them, they said I'd lost my mind and needed professional intervention. What they didn't expect was that I'd already gotten professional advice from the best estate lawyer in Chicago, and every single word they said next only proved I was making the right decision. By the time I was done with them, they realized too late that the woman they'd been manipulating for decades had finally learned to bite back, and their greed had cost them everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Caldwell, though most people knew me as Maggie. And at 72 years old, I had finally reached the point where I was tired of pretending that blood meant more than respect. For the past 5 decades, I had built Caldwell Industries from the ground up, transforming a small accounting firm into a multi-million-dollar financial consulting empire that employed over 300 people across 6 states. I had sacrificed marriages, friendships, and countless personal moments to create something lasting, something meaningful. What I hadn't anticipated was that my greatest achievements would become weapons in the hands of the people who were supposed to love me most. It all started 3 months ago on a crisp October morning when I made what I thought was a perfectly reasonable announcement during our monthly family brunch at my estate in Lake Forest. The dining room was filled with the usual suspects: my 3 children, their spouses, and my 4 grandchildren, all gathered around the mahogany table that had been in our family for 3 generations. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over the scene that should have been picture-perfect. I had prepared for this moment carefully, rehearsing the words in my mind for weeks. At my age, estate planning wasn't just prudent, it was essential, and I wanted my family to understand my intentions clearly. I stood at the head of the table, my coffee cup steady in my hands despite the gravity of what I was about to share. "I've been working with my attorney on updating my will," I began, my voice calm and measured. "I wanted you all to know that I've decided to leave the majority of my estate to the Children's Hospital Foundation, along with establishing a scholarship fund for underprivileged students pursuing business degrees." The silence that followed was deafening. Forks paused midway to mouths, coffee cups froze in hands, and even my youngest grandchild, 8-year-old Emma, seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. I had expected questions, perhaps some surprise, but what I hadn't anticipated was the immediate transformation that swept across their faces. My eldest son, Richard, was the first to break the silence. At 45, he had inherited his father's broad shoulders and commanding presence. But unlike his father, Richard had never learned the value of earning what he received. He set down his fork with deliberate force, the clink of metal against porcelain echoing through the room like a gunshot. "Mother, surely you're not serious," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension that had become his trademark over the years. "We need to discuss this properly. You can't just make decisions like this without consulting the family." I raised an eyebrow, feeling the first stirrings of irritation. "Consulting the family about my own estate? Richard, this is my money, earned through my work. I'm informing you, not asking for permission." My daughter Susan, 3 years younger than Richard and twice as entitled, leaned forward with that practiced smile she used when she wanted something. Susan had perfected the art of emotional manipulation over the years, combining her mother's intelligence with a calculating nature that would have impressed Machiavelli. "Mom, we understand you want to be charitable," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But don't you think you should take care of your own family first? Think about Emma's college fund, about securing the grandchildren's futures." I looked at Emma, who was indeed sitting at the table, but not for the reasons Susan implied. Emma attended the most exclusive private school in the area, took piano, lessons that cost more per hour than most people made in a day, and had a trust fund that had been established the day she was born. The idea that any of my grandchildren were in need of financial security was laughable. "Emma's college fund is already fully established," I replied evenly. All of the grandchildren have trust funds that will more than cover their education and provide them with comfortable starts in life. What I'm discussing is the remainder of my estate. My youngest son, David, who at 38 still lived in the guest house on my property despite having a perfectly good engineering degree and no apparent disabilities preventing him from finding his own place, finally spoke up. David had always been the most transparent about his motivations, which somehow made his greed more palatable than his siblings' elaborate pretenses. "But Mom, what about us? Richard's been helping run the company. Susan's got her kids to think about, and I've been taking care of the property. Don't we deserve something for all we've done?" The word deserve hung in the air like smoke, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. This was the moment I realized that my children had never seen me as their mother who had worked tirelessly to provide for them. I was a bank account with legs, a resource to be managed and eventually inherited. "What exactly have you done, David?" I asked, my voice still controlled but carrying a sharper edge. "Because as far as I can tell, you've been living rent-free in my guest house for 6 years, using my credit cards for your expenses, and the property maintenance you claim to do consists of occasionally mowing the lawn with equipment I purchased." David's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Richard jumped back into the conversation with the authority he believed his position as eldest son granted him. "Mother, this isn't about what we've done. This is about family obligation. You have a responsibility to your children and grandchildren. What would Dad think about you giving away his life's work to strangers?" The mention of my late husband struck exactly the wrong chord. James Caldwell had been dead for 8 years, and while he had indeed helped establish the foundation of our business, the empire that existed today was built long after his passing. More importantly, James had been the one person who truly understood my drive to succeed, my need to create something meaningful beyond the confines of traditional expectations. "Your father," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "would be proud that I'm using our success to help children who actually need it, rather than funding the lifestyle of grown adults who haven't learned to stand on their own feet." Susan's mask slipped for just a moment, and I caught a glimpse of the calculating mind behind her maternal concern. "Mom, you're 72 years old. Maybe it's time to consider that you might not be thinking as clearly as you used to. These are big decisions, and perhaps you should speak with someone professional about your mental state before making irreversible choices." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The suggestion hit the room like a physical blow. Even David looked uncomfortable with his sister's implication, though not uncomfortable enough to contradict her. Richard, however, nodded slowly, as if Susan had voiced something he'd been thinking for some time. "Susan has a point," he said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. "You've been making some unusual decisions lately, Mother. The donation announcements, the changes to company policy, even this conversation. Maybe it would be wise to have a professional evaluation, just to ensure you're making these choices with a clear mind." I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care, taking a moment to study the faces around my table. These people, these strangers wearing the faces of my children, were seriously suggesting that I was mentally incompetent because I had chosen to be charitable rather than provide them with an unearned windfall. "Let me understand this correctly," I said, my voice carrying the same tone I used in boardroom negotiations. "You believe that because I want to donate my money to help sick children and underprivileged students, I must be mentally impaired." "It's not normal, Mom," Susan pressed, apparently encouraged by Richard's support. "Normal grandmothers want to leave something for their families. Normal mothers don't cut their children out of wills to give money to strangers. Normal mothers," I repeated slowly, "also don't typically have children who live in their guest houses at 38 or daughters who only call when they need money for their husband's failed business ventures, or sons who haven't contributed a meaningful idea to the family company in over a decade. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard's face had gone pale. Susan's smile had completely disappeared, and David was staring at his plate as if it contained the answers to all of life's mysteries. Even their spouses, who had remained quietly supportive until this moment, were beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. My daughter-in-law Jennifer, Richard's wife of 15 years, finally spoke up. Jennifer had always been the most diplomatic of the family additions, but I could see the same calculating gleam in her eyes that I'd noticed in Susan. "Margaret, we're all just concerned about you," she said, her voice soft and reasonable. "You've been under a lot of stress with the company expansion, and sometimes stress can affect our judgment. No one's saying you're incompetent, just that. Maybe you should take some time before making such permanent decisions." "Stress," I repeated, almost amused by the suggestion. "I've been running this company for 50 years, Jennifer. I've navigated recessions, market crashes, and economic upheavals that would have destroyed weaker businesses. I think I can handle the stress of deciding how to distribute my own wealth." My son-in-law Michael, Susan's husband, chose that moment to join the conversation. Michael had always been the most transparent about his motivations, which I respected even when I disagreed with his methods. "Look, Margaret, I think we're all dancing around the real issue here," he said, leaning forward with his hands clasped on the table. "You've worked hard your whole life to build something amazing. We get that. But don't you want that work to continue through your family? Don't you want your grandchildren to carry on the Caldwell legacy?" "The Caldwell legacy," I mused, considering his words carefully. "And what exactly do you believe that legacy should be, Michael?" "Success," he replied without hesitation. "Financial security. The knowledge that the family name means something in this community." I nodded thoughtfully, then stood and walked to the window overlooking the gardens that James and I had planted together 30 years ago. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson that reminded me of better times, simpler times when my children saw me as more than a retirement plan. "You know," I said, still facing the window, "when I started this company, I had 3 goals. First, to prove that a woman could build something lasting in a man's world. Second, to provide financial security for my family. And third, to create something that would make a positive difference in other people's lives." I turned back to face the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I achieved the first goal decades ago. I've more than achieved the second. Every person in this room has benefited from opportunities and advantages that most people only dream of. But the third goal, the one that should matter most, seems to have gotten lost somewhere along the way. Richard stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Mother, you're being unreasonable. We're your family. We should come first, not some strangers you'll never meet." "Should you?" I asked, genuinely curious about his logic. "Because from where I stand, it seems like I've been putting you first for decades, and all it's accomplished is creating 3 adults who believe they're entitled to wealth they didn't earn simply because they share my DNA." Susan's composure finally cracked completely. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," she snapped, her voice rising to a pitch that made everyone else in the room wince. "This isn't like you, Mom. The mother who raised us would never say things like this. You're not thinking clearly, and we can't just stand by and watch you destroy our family's future because you're having some kind of breakdown." The word breakdown echoed in the silence that followed, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't a discussion about my estate planning. This was an intervention, carefully orchestrated to manipulate me into compliance through emotional blackmail and implied threats to my mental competency. "I see," I said quietly, my voice carrying a calm that I didn't entirely feel. So, because I'm not planning to fund your continued dependence, I must be having a breakdown. Because I want to help children who are actually in need, rather than adults who have never learned to provide for themselves, I'm mentally incompetent. Nobody's saying incompetent, David mumbled, though his eyes remained fixed on his plate. Aren't you? I challenged, looking directly at him. Because that's exactly what you're implying. You're suggesting that I need professional intervention to prevent me from making decisions about my own money. You're questioning my mental capacity because my priorities don't align with your financial expectations. Jennifer tried once more to smooth things over with her diplomatic approach. Margaret, we just think that maybe you should take some time to really consider all the implications of your decision. Maybe speak with a counselor or therapist, someone objective who can help you work through whatever might be driving this sudden change in your plans. Sudden change? I almost laughed at the characterization. Jennifer, I've been considering this decision for over 2 years. I've consulted with financial advisors, tax specialists, and yes, mental health professionals. I've had complete medical and psychological evaluations as part of my estate planning process, all of which confirm that I am in excellent mental health and completely capable of making informed decisions about my assets. The information seemed to surprise them, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they had taken my intelligence and planning capabilities. They had assumed that an elderly woman making charitable decisions must be acting impulsively or irrationally, rather than considering that I might have thought the matter through more thoroughly than they had. Richard, apparently realizing that the mental competency angle wasn't going to work, switched tactics. Fine, let's say you're thinking clearly. But Mom, you're making a mistake that can't be undone. Once you change the will, once you set up these donations, there's no going back. What if something happens and the family needs help? What if one of the grandchildren has an emergency? What kind of emergency could possibly require more money than they already have access to? I asked, genuinely puzzled by his hypothetical scenario. Each of the grandchildren has trust funds worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. You all have comfortable homes, reliable incomes, and extensive family support systems. What emergency could possibly arise that couldn't be handled with existing resources? Susan leaned forward again, her expression earnest and pleading. Mom, it's not just about emergencies, it's about opportunity. What if one of the kids wants to start a business? What if they want to invest in something amazing? What if they have dreams that require significant capital? Then they can do what I did, I replied evenly. They can work for it. They can build it themselves. They can learn the value of earning what they receive rather than simply expecting it to be handed to them. The suggestion that my grandchildren might actually have to work for their dreams seemed to strike the entire table as either revolutionary or horrifying, depending on their perspective. I could see the mental calculations happening behind their eyes as they tried to process the concept of a Caldwell who wasn't automatically entitled to unlimited financial resources. Michael tried a different approach, appealing to what he apparently believed were my maternal instincts. Margaret, think about Emma. She's only 8 years old. Don't you want to be able to give her the world? Don't you want to know that she'll never have to worry about money? I looked at Emma, who had been quietly coloring in a book throughout most of the conversation, occasionally glancing up when voices were raised but otherwise seeming largely uninterested in the adult drama unfolding around her. She was a beautiful child, intelligent and curious, with her grandfather's eyes and her grandmother's stubborn streak. I want Emma to know that she's capable of creating her own world, I said softly. I want her to understand that true security comes from within, from developing skills and character and resilience. I want her to value money as a tool rather than seeing it as an entitlement. That's easy to say when you have millions, David muttered, finally looking up from his plate. I didn't always have millions, David, I reminded him sharply. I started with nothing. I worked 16-hour days for years. I missed family dinners and school plays and birthday parties because I was building something that would benefit all of us. The difference is that I built it for us, not just for myself. And now you're taking it away from us, Richard said, his voice flat and bitter. I'm not taking anything away from you, I corrected. I'm choosing not to give you something. That was never yours to begin with. There's a significant difference between those two concepts, though I understand that the distinction might be difficult to grasp when you've spent your entire adult life assuming that my success was automatically your inheritance. The conversation continued to spiral downward from there, with each family member taking turns to express their disappointment, their confusion, and their growing determination to convince me that I was making a terrible mistake. What struck me most was not their disagreement with my decision, which I had expected, but their absolute certainty that they had the right to override my choices about my own assets. By the time the brunch ended, the battle lines had been clearly drawn. My children and their spouses had made it abundantly clear that they considered my charitable intentions to be evidence of mental decline, and they were prepared to take whatever steps necessary to protect what they saw as their rightful inheritance. I, on the other hand, had reached the uncomfortable realization that the people I had raised and supported had grown into adults who valued my money far more than they valued me. As they filed out of the dining room, making polite but strained goodbyes, I caught fragments of whispered conversations that confirmed my worst suspicions. They weren't planning to accept my decision gracefully. They were planning to fight it, and they were prepared to use whatever weapons they could find to win that fight. Standing alone in my dining room, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a pleasant family gathering, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: doubt. Not about my decision to donate my wealth to charity, but about the wisdom of raising children who believed they were entitled to everything without earning anything. For the first time in my life, I wondered if I had failed not as a businesswoman or a philanthropist, but as a mother. Had I given them too much? Had I protected them so thoroughly from financial hardship that I had robbed them of the opportunity to develop their own strength and resilience? The questions haunted me as I cleared the table, stacking plates and folding napkins with the mechanical precision of someone whose mind was elsewhere. I had built an empire, amassed a fortune, and achieved everything I had ever dreamed of accomplishing. But looking at the empty chairs around my table, I realized that success without family was a hollow victory, and family without respect was an expensive burden. That afternoon, I called my attorney, Patricia Morrison, and scheduled an appointment for the following week. Not because I intended to change my mind about the donations, but because I suspected I was going to need professional guidance to navigate whatever my children were planning next. I had spent 50 years learning to anticipate market trends and business challenges, but I was discovering that family warfare required an entirely different set of skills. As the sun set over Lake Forest that evening, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reminded me of happier times, I made myself a simple dinner and ate it alone at the kitchen counter. The house felt different somehow, larger and emptier than it had that morning. The silence that had once been peaceful now felt heavy with unspoken tensions and unresolved conflicts. I thought about calling James, a habit I still hadn't broken 8 years after his death. He would have known what to say, would have found a way to bridge the gap between my values and our children's expectations. But James wasn't here to mediate, and I was left to navigate this particular storm on my own. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I had shared with my husband for 30 years, wondering if I was making the right choice, and whether the cost of that choice was going to be higher than I had anticipated. I had always believed that doing the right thing was its own reward, but I was beginning to understand that sometimes the right thing came with a price that could test even the strongest convictions. The next morning brought the first indication that my children's threats hadn't been empty promises. I woke to find 3 messages on my answering machine, 2 emails in my inbox, and a formal letter delivered by courier, all from different legal and medical professionals that my children had apparently contacted on my behalf. The theme was consistent across all communications: concerns about my mental state, questions about my decision-making capacity, and offers of professional evaluation and support. Reading through them, I felt a cold anger settle in my chest as I realized that my own children had spent less than 24 hours before beginning a coordinated campaign to have my mental competency questioned by people who had never met me. It was, I realized, going to be a very interesting week. The first professional to arrive at my door was Dr. Helena Vasquez, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in cognitive assessments for elderly patients. She appeared on Wednesday morning, exactly 3 days after our family brunch, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of sympathetic expression that medical professionals reserve for patients they believe are in denial about their conditions. I invited her into my study, a room lined with mahogany bookshelves and decorated with awards from various business organizations, photographs from charity galas, and framed letters of appreciation from the countless nonprofits I had supported over the years. If Dr. Vasquez noticed the evidence of my active and engaged lifestyle, she gave no indication. "Mrs. Caldwell," she began, settling into the chair across from my desk with practiced ease, "your family has expressed some concerns about recent changes in your behavior and decision-making patterns. They've asked me to conduct a preliminary assessment to ensure that you're receiving appropriate care and support." I folded my hands in my lap and regarded her with the same level gaze I had used to intimidate corporate executives for 5 decades. "Dr. Vasquez, before we begin, I'd like to understand exactly what my family told you about these alleged changes in my behavior." She consulted her notes with the efficiency of someone who had conducted thousands of similar evaluations. "They mentioned that you've made some unusual financial decisions recently, including plans to donate significant assets to charity rather than preserving them for family inheritance. They also indicated that you've become more confrontational and less receptive to family input on important matters." "I see," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "And, in your professional opinion, do either of those behaviors necessarily indicate cognitive impairment?" Dr. Vasquez shifted slightly in her chair, and I caught the first hint of uncertainty in her demeanor. "Well, significant changes in financial behavior can sometimes be early indicators of various conditions, particularly when they represent departures from established patterns. However, I should note that charitable giving is certainly not inherently problematic." "Indeed," I agreed. "Dr. Vasquez, may I ask what specific information my family provided about my medical history, my current cognitive function, or my overall mental health status?" She consulted her notes again, and I watched as a slight frown creased her forehead. "They indicated that you've been showing signs of confusion, memory problems, and poor judgment. They mentioned that you've been making important decisions without consulting family members who have traditionally been involved in such matters." I opened the top drawer of my desk and withdrew a thick folder, placing it carefully on the surface, between us. "Dr. Vasquez, this folder contains the results of a comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation I underwent 6 months ago as part of my estate planning process. The evaluation included cognitive testing, memory assessments, and a full psychological profile conducted by Dr. Amanda Chen at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Would you like to review those results before we proceed?" The color drained from Dr. Vasquez's face as she realized she had been maneuvered into a situation that was far more complex than her initial briefing had suggested. "Mrs. Caldwell, I wasn't aware that you had undergone recent professional evaluation." "No," I said, quietly. "I imagine you weren't. Just as I imagine my family failed to mention that I currently serve on the boards of 3 major charities, chair the committee for the annual Lake Forest Business Association Gala, and successfully managed a major corporate merger just 8 months ago. None of which would typically be possible for someone experiencing the kind of cognitive decline they've described." Dr. Vasquez opened the folder and began reviewing the documents inside, her expression growing more uncomfortable. With each page, the evaluation results painted a picture of a woman in excellent mental health, with cognitive function well above average for her age group and no indicators of any form of dementia or psychological impairment. "These results are quite comprehensive," she said finally, closing the folder with obvious reluctance. "Mrs. Caldwell, I believe there may have been some misunderstanding about the nature of my visit today." "On the contrary," I replied, my voice carrying the edge of steel that had served me well in countless business negotiations. "I believe your visit is proceeding exactly as intended. My family contacted you because they hope to find a medical professional who would support their contention that I am mentally unfit to make decisions about my own assets. What they failed to anticipate was that I would be prepared for such an approach." Dr. Vasquez gathered her materials with the hasty efficiency of someone who wanted to escape an increasingly awkward situation. "Mrs. Caldwell, I apologize for any inconvenience. It appears that your family's concerns may have been somewhat overstated." "Somewhat," I agreed dryly. "Dr. Vasquez, before you leave, I'd like you to understand something about the situation you've inadvertently become involved in. My children are not concerned about my mental health. They are concerned about their financial future. There is a significant difference between those two things, and confusing them does a disservice to families who are genuinely dealing with cognitive decline in their elderly relatives." She nodded stiffly, clearly eager to end the conversation and remove herself from what she now recognized as a family dispute rather than a medical situation. After she left, I called my attorney Patricia Morrison and requested an immediate meeting to discuss what I suspected was going to be an escalating situation. Patricia Morrison was a formidable woman in her early 60s, who had built her reputation by handling complex estate disputes for Chicago's wealthiest families. She had shoulder-length silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of presence that commanded respect in any room she entered. More importantly, she had been my legal counsel for over 15 years and understood both my business philosophy and my family dynamics. "Margaret," she said, settling into the chair in my study that Dr. Vasquez had vacated just hours earlier. "When you called this morning, you mentioned that your children are attempting to challenge your mental competency. I have to say, that's a bold strategy considering your recent evaluation results." I handed her copies of the correspondence I had received from various medical and legal professionals. "They're not just attempting it, Patricia. They're actively pursuing it. Dr. Vasquez was the first, but according to these messages, she won't be the last." Patricia reviewed the documents with the meticulous attention to detail that had made her one of Chicago's most sought-after estate attorneys. "This is interesting," she said finally. "They've contacted a geriatric psychiatrist, a neurologist, and what appears to be a legal firm that specializes in guardianship proceedings. That suggests a coordinated effort rather than spontaneous family concern." "That's what I suspected," I replied. "Patricia, I need to understand my options here. Can they actually succeed in having me declared incompetent based on their allegations?" She leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "In Illinois, the process for determining mental incompetency is quite rigorous. They would need to file a petition with the court, provide evidence of your alleged impairment, and have you evaluated by court-appointed medical professionals. Given your recent evaluation results and your demonstrated ability to manage complex business affairs, such a petition would be extremely difficult to sustain, but not impossible," I pressed. "Not impossible," she admitted, "but highly unlikely to succeed. However, the process itself can be damaging and disruptive, even if the ultimate outcome favors you. Court proceedings become public record, and the allegations alone can affect your business relationships and personal reputation." I felt a cold anger settling in my chest as I realized the full scope of what my children were attempting. They weren't just trying to protect their inheritance. They were prepared to destroy my reputation and drag our family through a public legal battle to get what they wanted. "What would you recommend?" I asked. Patricia's smile was sharp and predatory, the expression of someone who enjoyed complex legal challenges. I recommend we get ahead of this situation. Rather than waiting for them to file their petition, we take proactive steps to document your mental competency and establish a clear legal record of their motivations. Over the next hour, we developed a comprehensive strategy that would protect my interests while exposing the true nature of my children's concerns. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. The next morning brought a visit from Dr. Robert Kim, the neurologist my family had contacted. Unlike Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Kim arrived with a more skeptical attitude and a clear agenda. He spent nearly 3 hours conducting various tests and assessments, all of which I passed with flying colors. His conclusions were identical to Dr. Vasquez's. There was no evidence of cognitive impairment or neurological decline. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said as he packed his equipment, "I'm curious about something. Your family seemed quite convinced that you were experiencing significant cognitive problems, but my evaluation suggests otherwise. Have you noticed any changes in your mental function that might have concerned them?" I considered his question carefully. "Dr. Kim, the only change in my mental function has been an increased clarity about what I want to accomplish with the remainder of my life and a decreased tolerance for manipulation. If my family interprets those changes as cognitive decline, that says more about their expectations than it does about my mental health." He nodded slowly, clearly understanding the implications of what I was telling him. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'll be submitting my report to your family, but I want you to know that I found no evidence of any neurological or cognitive impairment. In fact, your test results are quite impressive for someone of any age." That afternoon, I received a phone call from Richard that confirmed my suspicions about their next move. His voice was tight with frustration and barely controlled anger, as he delivered what I recognized as an ultimatum disguised as concern. "Mother, we've heard from both doctors you've seen this week, and frankly, we're not satisfied with their conclusions. We think you may have influenced their assessments somehow, or perhaps they weren't thorough enough. We've arranged for you to see Dr. Harrison Blackwell next week. He's a specialist in geriatric psychology with extensive experience in cases like yours." "Cases like mine," I repeated slowly. "And what exactly do you mean by that, Richard?" "Cases where elderly individuals are making irrational financial decisions that could harm their families," he replied without hesitation. "Dr. Blackwell understands the family dynamics involved in these situations, and he won't be swayed by surface appearances or rehearsed responses." The threat was clear. They had found a doctor who would give them the diagnosis they wanted, regardless of the evidence. I felt my last reserves of maternal patience finally exhaust themselves as I realized that my children were prepared to shop for medical opinions until they found one that supported their predetermined conclusion. "Richard," I said, my voice carrying the authority I had used to close million-dollar deals, "let me be very clear about something. I will not be seeing Dr. Blackwell or any other medical professional you choose to send my way. I have undergone comprehensive evaluation by qualified objective professionals, and the results speak for themselves. If you choose to continue pursuing this course of action, you will be doing so without my cooperation." "You don't have a choice, Mother," Richard replied, his voice turning cold. "If you refuse to cooperate with reasonable medical evaluation, that refusal itself becomes evidence of impaired judgment. We're prepared to petition the court for a guardianship hearing if necessary." The line went dead, leaving me staring at the phone and processing the magnitude of what my eldest son had just threatened. They were prepared to have me declared legally incompetent and placed under guardianship, effectively stripping me of all control over my assets and personal decisions. I immediately called Patricia Morrison, who listened to my account of the conversation with professional calm and personal outrage. "Margaret, this changes things significantly," she said. "A guardianship petition is a serious legal action that..." could tie up your assets for months, even if it ultimately fails. We need to take immediate steps to protect your interests." "What kind of steps?" I asked. "First, we're going to arrange for you to undergo evaluation by the most respected geriatric psychiatrist in Chicago, someone whose credentials and reputation are beyond question. Second, we're going to document every aspect of your current cognitive function and business activities. Third, we're going to investigate this Dr. Blackwell that your son mentioned." The investigation into Dr. Harrison Blackwell proved illuminating. Patricia's research revealed that he had a history of providing favorable assessments for families seeking to establish guardianships over elderly relatives, often in cases where significant financial assets were involved. Several of his diagnoses had been overturned on appeal, and he was currently under investigation by the state medical board for questionable practices. "Your children have essentially hired a gun for hire," Patricia explained during our meeting the following day. "Dr. Blackwell has built a practice around telling families what they want to hear about their elderly relatives, regardless of the medical evidence." "So they're not just questioning my competency," I said, feeling the pieces of their strategy fall into place. "They're actively working to manufacture evidence of incompetency." "Exactly," Patricia confirmed. "Which brings me to the next part of our strategy. We're going to give them exactly what they're asking for, but not in the way they expect." Over the weekend, I received visits from each of my children, ostensibly to check on my well-being, but actually to pressure me into compliance with their demands. Susan arrived first, bringing flowers and wearing the concerned expression she had perfected over the years. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation last week," she said, arranging the flowers in a vase with unnecessary precision. "I realize we all got a little emotional, and maybe we didn't express ourselves as clearly as we should have." I watched her performance with the detached interest of someone observing a particularly unconvincing theatrical production. "How so, Susan?" "Well, I think what we were trying to say is that we're worried about you. You're at an age where people sometimes make decisions they later regret, and we just want to make sure you have all the support and guidance you need." "Support and guidance from whom?" I asked. "From professionals who understand these situations," she replied, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that suggested she was speaking to a child rather than her mother. "People who can help you think through the long-term consequences of major financial decisions." "Such as Dr. Blackwell?" I suggested. Susan's face brightened with apparent relief. "Yes, exactly. Dr. Blackwell has extensive experience helping families navigate exactly these kinds of situations. He understands the importance of family unity and making decisions that benefit everyone involved." "I see," I said quietly. "And if I refuse to see Dr. Blackwell?" Her mask slipped just slightly, revealing the steel beneath the maternal concern. "Mom, I really don't think that's an option anymore. Richard has already spoken with attorneys about filing a guardianship petition. If you continue to refuse reasonable medical evaluation, we don't want it to come to that, but we will protect this family's interests if necessary." The word protect was particularly interesting, as it revealed exactly how Susan viewed the situation. In her mind, my decision to donate my wealth to charity was an attack on the family that required defensive measures. My autonomy and right to make decisions about my own assets were secondary to their financial interests. David's visit later that afternoon was less sophisticated, but more emotionally manipulative. He brought his daughter Emma with him, clearly, hoping that my affection for my granddaughter would override my resistance to their demands. "Grandma Maggie," Emma said, climbing onto my lap with the unself-conscious affection of childhood, "Daddy says you might be sick. Are you going to be okay?" I held Emma close and looked over her head at my youngest son, who had the grace to look slightly ashamed of using his 8-year-old daughter as emotional leverage. "I'm perfectly fine, sweetheart. Sometimes adults disagree about things, and that can be confusing, but I'm not sick." David shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. "Mom, Emma's been worried about you since she heard us talking. She doesn't understand why you would want to give away money that could help secure her future. Emma, I said, still holding my granddaughter but addressing my son, doesn't understand because she's 8 years old and shouldn't be burdened with adult financial concerns. The fact that you've involved her in this situation tells me more about your character than anything else you could have said. She's part of this family too, David protested. She has a right to know what's happening to her inheritance. Her inheritance, I repeated slowly. David, Emma is 8 years old. The idea that she has already developed expectations about inheriting my money suggests that you've been teaching her to view me as a source of financial security rather than as her grandmother. David's face flushed red, but before he could respond, Emma looked up at me with curious eyes. Grandma, what's an inheritance? I smiled down at her, feeling a surge of affection for the one family member who was still innocent of the greed that had infected the adults. An inheritance is when someone gives you something after they die, sweetie. But the most important things people can give you are love, knowledge, and the tools to build your own happiness. Like teaching me to paint? She asked. Exactly like teaching you to paint, I confirmed, remembering the hours we had spent together in my studio, working on watercolor landscapes and abstract designs. David left shortly after that exchange, clearly frustrated that his emotional manipulation had backfired. But his visit had served an important purpose for me. It confirmed that my children were prepared to use their own children as weapons in their campaign to control my assets. Richard's visit on Sunday was the most direct and threatening of the I-3. He arrived alone, without the pretense of concern or the emotional manipulation that his siblings had employed. Instead, he came with the cold efficiency of a businessman presenting a final offer. Mother, I'm going to be straightforward with you, he said, declining my offer of coffee and remaining standing in my living room like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments. We've arranged for Dr. Blackwell to evaluate you this Wednesday. If you refuse to cooperate, we will file a guardianship petition with the court on Thursday morning. And if I do cooperate? I asked. Then we hope Dr. Blackwell will confirm what we already know, that you're not thinking clearly about these financial decisions and need family support to make better choices. I studied my eldest son's face, looking for any trace of the boy. I had raised the young man who had once hugged me after college graduation and promised to make me proud. What I saw instead was a stranger wearing his features, someone who had decided that his financial interests were more important than my autonomy or dignity. Richard, I said finally, do you truly believe that I am mentally incompetent? Or do you simply disagree with my decision to donate my money to charity? He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. Then his jaw tightened, and his expression hardened again. I believe you're making a mistake that will hurt this family for generations, he said. And I believe that any reasonable person would agree with that assessment. But not incompetent, I pressed. You don't actually believe I'm suffering from dementia or cognitive decline. What I believe doesn't matter, he replied coldly. What matters is what can be proven in court, and Dr. Blackwell is very good at proving what needs to be proven. The honesty of his statement was breathtaking in its callousness. Richard wasn't concerned about my mental health. He was concerned about winning a legal battle. He had just admitted that they were prepared to manufacture evidence of my incompetency in order to gain control of my assets. After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, watching the autumn shadows lengthen across the floor and processing the full scope of what my children were planning. They weren't just questioning my decision. They were preparing to destroy my reputation, challenge my competency, and strip away my legal rights in order to protect their financial expectations. That evening, I called Patricia Morrison at her home, something I had never done in 15 years of working together. Patricia, I said when she answered, I need to know. How quickly can we implement the nuclear option? There was a pause. On the other end of the line, And then Patricia's voice came back sharp with interest. How quickly do you need it implemented? By Wednesday morning, I replied. Before my appointment with Dr. Blackwell. Margaret, are you sure about this? Once we take this step, there's no going back. I looked around my living room, at the photographs of family vacations and graduation ceremonies, at the awards, and mementos of a life spent building something meaningful. Then I thought about my children's threats, their willingness to use Emma as emotional leverage, and their complete disregard for my autonomy and dignity. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Then we'll be ready, Patricia replied. Margaret, I have to ask, are you prepared for how they're going to react when they realize what you've done? I smiled, feeling a sense of calm determination settle over me like armor. Patricia, after this week, I don't think anything they do could surprise me anymore. As it turned out, I was wrong about that, but I wouldn't discover just how wrong until Wednesday morning, when Dr. Blackwell arrived at my home expecting to find a confused elderly woman, and instead walked into a situation that would change everything for everyone involved. The game, as they say, was about to begin in earnest. Wednesday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes with autumn in Chicago, and I woke with the calm certainty of someone who had spent the night finalizing battle plans rather than wrestling with doubt. By 7:30, I was dressed in my best navy suit, the one I had worn to close the most important business deals of my career, and I was ready for whatever Dr. Harrison Blackwell thought he was going to accomplish. Patricia Morrison arrived. At 8 o'clock sharp, accompanied by two men I hadn't met before. The first was Dr. Marcus Hoffman, a distinguished gentleman in his early 70s who served as the head of geriatric psychiatry at Rush University Medical Center and held a reputation that was beyond reproach in Chicago's medical community. The second was James Chen, a court reporter whose presence would ensure that every word spoken in my home that morning would be officially documented. Margaret, Patricia said as I welcomed them into my study, Dr. Hoffman has agreed to conduct an independent evaluation this morning, prior to Dr. Blackwell's arrival. Mr. Chen will be recording everything for legal purposes. Dr. Hoffman was everything that Dr. Blackwell apparently was not: thorough, objective, and completely uninterested in reaching predetermined conclusions. He spent 90 minutes conducting the most comprehensive cognitive assessment I had ever experienced, testing everything from short-term memory to complex problem-solving abilities. His questions were challenging but fair, his manner professional but kind. Mrs. Caldwell, he said as he concluded his evaluation, I want to be absolutely clear about my findings. You demonstrate cognitive function that is not only normal for your age group, but superior to the average in several key areas. Your memory is excellent, your reasoning abilities are sharp, and your judgment appears sound. I can find no evidence of any cognitive impairment or decline. Thank you, Dr. Hoffman, I replied. And what is your professional opinion about someone in my condition making significant financial decisions, such as charitable donations? In my professional opinion, he said, looking directly into the recording equipment, you are fully capable of making informed decisions about your assets. Charitable giving is a common and psychologically healthy activity for individuals of your socioeconomic status, and your specific plans appear well considered and thoughtfully structured. At 9:45, Dr. Blackwell arrived. He was a thin man in his 60s with nervous energy and the kind of overly confident demeanor that immediately put me on guard. He carried a briefcase that seemed too large for the materials it contained and wore an expensive suit that somehow managed to look cheap. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, extending his hand with a smile that never reached his eyes. I'm Dr. Harrison. Blackwell, your family has asked me to conduct an evaluation to ensure that you're receiving appropriate care and making sound decisions about your future. Dr. Blackwell, I replied, shaking his hand briefly. Before we begin, I'd like you to meet Dr. Marcus Hoffman from Rush University Medical Center, my attorney Patricia Morrison, and court reporter James Chen. They'll be observing your evaluation today." The color drained from Dr. Blackwell's face as he realized that his private assessment had become a public proceeding with official documentation. He glanced around the room like a trapped animal, clearly understanding that whatever methods he had planned to use would now be subject to professional scrutiny and legal review. "Mrs. Caldwell, I typically conduct my evaluations privately," he said, his voice strained. "The presence of observers can affect the validity of the assessment." "On the contrary," Dr. Hoffman interjected smoothly, "the presence of qualified observers ensures the integrity of the evaluation process. I'm sure you understand the importance of maintaining professional standards, Dr. Blackwell." What followed was the most uncomfortable 90 minutes I had ever spent in my own home. Dr. Blackwell's questions were leading, his interpretations biased, and his conclusions apparently predetermined. He asked about my relationship with my children in ways that suggested any disagreement indicated cognitive problems. He inquired about my charitable intentions, as if generosity were a symptom of mental decline. Most tellingly, he seemed frustrated when I provided clear, coherent answers to questions that were obviously designed to elicit confused or irrational responses. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said finally, "your family has expressed concern that you're making financial decisions that seem inconsistent with your previous patterns. How do you respond to their suggestion that you may be experiencing some cognitive difficulties?" I looked directly at the recording equipment and spoke with the clarity and authority I had developed over 5 decades of public speaking. "Dr. Blackwell, my previous pattern was to prioritize my family's financial security above all other considerations. Having achieved that goal completely, I am now free to pursue charitable activities that align with my values. The only change in my cognitive function has been an increased clarity about what I want to accomplish with the remainder of my life." "But don't you think it's unusual for someone your age to make such dramatic changes in estate planning?" he pressed. "Dr. Blackwell," Dr. Hoffman interrupted, "could you explain the clinical basis for considering charitable giving to be unusual behavior in elderly individuals? Because the research literature suggests exactly the opposite." Dr. Blackwell's composure cracked visibly. "Dr. Hoffman, I'm conducting this evaluation based on the specific concerns raised by Mrs. Caldwell's family members." "And what clinical training do Mrs. Caldwell's family members possess that qualifies them to identify cognitive impairment?" Dr. Hoffman asked with deadly politeness. The evaluation concluded with Dr. Blackwell hastily packing his materials and promising to submit his report within 48 hours. As soon as he left, Dr. Hoffman turned to Patricia with an expression of professional disgust. "That was the most unprofessional evaluation I've witnessed in 40 years of practice," he said. Dr. Blackwell's questions were leading. His methodology was flawed, and his apparent predetermined conclusions violate every standard of ethical medical practice. "Will you be willing to testify to that effect if necessary?" Patricia asked. "I'll be happy to testify," Dr. Hoffman replied. "In fact, I'll be recommending that the State Medical Board investigate Dr. Blackwell's practices based on what I observed here today." After Dr. Hoffman and Mr. Chen departed, Patricia and I reviewed the final details of our strategy. The nuclear option, as she had called it, was actually quite elegant in its simplicity. Rather than waiting for my children to file their guardianship petition, we were going to take preemptive action that would not only protect my assets, but expose their true motivations in a way that would make any future legal challenges impossible. "Margaret, once we implement this plan, your relationship with your children will be permanently altered," Patricia warned. "Are you absolutely certain this is what you want?" I thought about Emma using her 8-year-old daughter as emotional leverage, about Susan's patronizing suggestions that I needed professional guidance, about Richard's cold admission that what mattered was what could be proven in court regardless of the truth. I thought about a lifetime of sacrifices I had made to ensure their security, only to discover that they viewed my generosity as weakness and my success as their entitlement. Patricia, they made this choice when they decided to have me declared mentally incompetent rather than respect my autonomy. I'm simply responding to their actions with appropriate consequences. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Patricia called a meeting at the offices of Caldwell Industries. The conference room was filled with the company's senior executives, the board of directors, and several representatives from local media outlets. My children had been invited but told only that I would be making an important announcement about the company's future. Richard arrived first, looking confident and slightly smug, clearly believing that Dr. Blackwell's evaluation would soon provide them with the ammunition they needed to challenge my competency. Susan and David followed shortly after, both wearing expressions of concerned family members preparing to support their troubled mother through a difficult announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, standing at the head of the conference table with the same commanding presence I had used to build an empire, "I've called this meeting to make several important announcements regarding my personal estate planning and the future of Caldwell Industries." My children leaned forward with obvious interest, probably expecting me to announce that I had reconsidered my charitable intentions under the pressure of their medical evaluations. "First," I continued, "I want to address some recent allegations that have been made regarding my mental competency. As you know, I recently underwent comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation as part of my estate planning process. Those evaluations confirmed that I am in excellent mental health and fully capable of making informed decisions about my assets." I gestured to Patricia, who distributed copies of Dr. Hoffman's evaluation to everyone present. However, because certain family members have questioned those results, I arranged for an independent assessment this morning by Dr. Marcus Hoffman, one of Chicago's most respected geriatric psychiatrists. Dr. Hoffman's evaluation, which was conducted under official observation and documentation, confirmed the previous findings. I am mentally competent and fully capable of managing my affairs. Richard's confident expression was beginning to falter as he realized that their medical strategy had not only failed, but been officially documented as baseless. "Second," I continued, "I want to address the specific charitable plans that have generated so much family concern. Effective immediately, I am establishing the Caldwell Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. The foundation will focus on supporting children's health care and educational opportunities for underprivileged students." The room buzzed with approving murmurs from the board members and executives, most of whom had been aware of my charitable intentions and supported them enthusiastically. "Third, I am pleased to announce that I will be stepping down as CEO of Caldwell Industries, effective at the end of this fiscal year. The board has unanimously approved the appointment of Sarah Mitchell as my successor." Sarah Mitchell was a brilliant executive in her early 40s who had worked for the company for 12 years and was widely respected both within the organization and throughout the industry. Her appointment had been planned for months and represented a natural succession that would ensure the company's continued success. "Finally," I said, my voice carrying the weight of absolute finality, "I want to address some personal family matters that have unfortunately become relevant to these business decisions." My children were now sitting rigidly in their chairs, clearly sensing that something was going very wrong with whatever plan they had envisioned for this meeting. Over the past week, I have been subjected to a coordinated campaign by my 3 adult children to have me declared mentally incompetent. This campaign has included hiring medical professionals to provide biased evaluations, threatening to file guardianship petitions, and using my 8-year-old granddaughter as emotional leverage in their attempts to manipulate my decision-making. The room fell completely silent. Several board members turned to stare at Richard, Susan, and David with expressions of shock and disgust. These actions have forced me to recognize that my children view me not as their mother, but as a source of unearned wealth that they believe they are entitled to inherit. Their willingness to destroy my reputation and challenge my legal autonomy in service of their financial expectations has made it clear that they are not suitable beneficiaries for the legacy I have worked a lifetime to create. Richard started to stand, his face pale with fury, but Patricia gestured sharply for him to remain seated. Therefore, I continued, I am announcing today that I have executed a new will that removes Richard, Susan, and David Caldwell as beneficiaries of my estate. Their inheritance, which would have totaled approximately $40 million, will instead be donated to the Caldwell Foundation to further its charitable mission. The silence that followed was deafening. My children sat frozen in their chairs, their faces cycling through shock, disbelief, and dawning horror as they realized the magnitude of what had just happened. Additionally, I said, effective immediately, Richard Caldwell is being removed from his position as Vice President of Operations. David Caldwell's employment as a property manager is terminated, and Susan Caldwell's consulting contract with the company is canceled. Richard finally found his voice. "You can't do this!" he shouted, jumping to his feet with his face flushed, red with rage. "We'll challenge this in court. We'll prove you're not competent to make these decisions." "With what evidence?" Patricia asked smoothly, standing to address the room. "You've now heard multiple professional evaluations confirming Mrs. Caldwell's mental competency. You've witnessed her making complex business decisions with complete clarity and sound judgment. And most importantly, you've just demonstrated in front of witnesses your primary motivation for challenging her competency, your own financial interests." Susan was crying now, but I could see the calculation behind her tears. "Mom, please, you're destroying our family over money. Can't we work this out? Can't we find some compromise?" "Susan," I replied calmly, "you destroyed our family the moment you decided that my money was more important than my autonomy. You made it clear that you view me as a resource to be controlled rather than as your mother deserving respect. I am simply responding to the reality you created." David, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "What about Emma? What about the other grandchildren? You're punishing them for our mistakes." "The grandchildren all have substantial trust funds that remain completely intact," I replied. "They will have every educational and professional opportunity they could want. What they won't have is the expectation that wealth should be inherited rather than earned." The meeting concluded with my children storming out of the conference room, making threats and accusations that only served to further demonstrate their true priorities. The board members and executives, meanwhile, expressed overwhelming support for my decisions and praised my handling of what they recognized as an extremely difficult family situation. Over the next several days, my children made good on their threats to challenge my actions in court. They filed a guardianship petition, hired expensive attorneys, and launched a public relations campaign designed to portray me as a confused elderly woman being manipulated by unscrupulous advisors. Their efforts backfired spectacularly. Dr. Hoffman's evaluation, combined with the documented evidence of their own financial motivations, made their case impossible to sustain. The court dismissed their petition within a week, and the judge issued a strongly worded opinion criticizing their attempt to use the guardianship process to override valid estate planning decisions. More damaging to their cause was the public attention their legal challenge attracted. Several news outlets picked up the story, and the narrative that emerged was not the one they had hoped for. Instead of a family protecting a vulnerable elderly relative, the coverage portrayed them as greedy adult children attempting to manipulate the legal system to secure an inheritance they had not earned. The professional consequences for Dr. Blackwell were swift and severe. The state medical board launched an investigation based on Dr. Hoffman's complaint, and within a month, Dr. Blackwell's license was suspended pending a full review of his practices. It emerged that my family's case was part of a pattern of unethical behavior that had been developing for years. Richard's attempts to find new employment were hampered by the public nature of the family dispute and his well-documented role in attempting to have his own mother declared incompetent for financial gain. Word traveled quickly through Chicago's business community, and his reputation never recovered. Susan's consulting business collapsed as clients became uncomfortable with the negative publicity and questions about her character. Her husband's failed ventures, which had been subsidized by loans from me for years, finally folded without that support. David, who had never developed any significant professional skills during his years of living off my generosity, found himself completely unprepared for independent life. He was forced to move into a small apartment and take a series of entry-level jobs that barely covered his basic expenses. The most painful consequence, however, was the impact on my relationship with my grandchildren. Richard and Susan used their children as weapons in their ongoing campaign against me, telling them that I had rejected the family and chosen strangers over my own blood. They poisoned the children's minds with resentment and bitterness, ensuring that the natural love between grandparents and grandchildren would be replaced with confusion and anger. Only Emma, too young to fully understand the adult conflicts, continued to show me the uncomplicated affection of childhood. During the few occasions when David brought her to visit, she would curl up in my lap and ask why everyone was so angry all the time. "Sometimes adults make mistakes, sweetheart," I would tell her, stroking her hair and feeling the ache of loss for the family relationships that might have been. "Sometimes people get so focused on money that they forget about love." "Do you still love Daddy?" she would ask with the directness of childhood. "I will always love your daddy," I would answer honestly. But love doesn't mean allowing people to hurt you, even when those people are family. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a letter from Richard. It was a carefully crafted apology that acknowledged their mistakes and asked for the opportunity to rebuild our relationship. The letter was obviously written with legal advice, designed to lay the groundwork for a future challenge to my estate planning while appearing to show genuine remorse. I showed the letter to Patricia, who read it with the cynical eye of someone who had seen countless similar attempts at manipulation. "It's well written," she admitted, "but notice what's missing. There's no acceptance of responsibility for the damage they caused, no acknowledgement that your charitable intentions are valid, and no genuine understanding of why their behavior was so harmful. This is a strategic document, not a heartfelt apology." I filed the letter away without responding. If my children were genuinely interested in rebuilding our relationship, they would need to demonstrate that interest through actions rather than words. They would need to show respect for my autonomy, support for my charitable goals, and genuine remorse for the pain they had caused. That demonstration never came. 2 years later, as I write this account, my children and I remain estranged. They have never acknowledged the legitimacy of my charitable goals or expressed genuine remorse for their attempts to have me declared incompetent. They continue to view themselves as the victims of my unreasonable decisions rather than the architects of their own consequences. The Caldwell Foundation, meanwhile, has flourished beyond my wildest expectations. The $50 million initial endowment has grown to over $70 million through careful investment and additional donations from other philanthropists inspired by the foundation's mission. We have funded medical treatments for hundreds of children, provided college scholarships for dozens of students, and established educational programs that will benefit communities for generations to come. Caldwell Industries thrives under Sarah Mitchell's leadership. The company has expanded into new markets, developed innovative services, and maintained the reputation for excellence that took me 50 years to build. The employees who depend on the company for their livelihoods continue to prosper, and the business remains a positive force in the Chicago community. As for me, I have discovered that the peace of mind that comes from living according to one's values is worth more than all the family harmony that money could buy. I wake each morning knowing that my life's work is being used to help people who truly need it, rather than funding the continued dependence of adults who never learned to value anything they didn't inherit. The decision to disinherit my children was not made lightly, and I would be lying if I claimed it didn't cause me pain. No mother wants to be estranged from her children, regardless of the circumstances that led to that estrangement. But I have learned that love without respect is not really love at all, and that enabling harmful behavior in the name of family loyalty ultimately serves no one's best interests. My children said I needed professional care because I chose charity over inheritance. What I actually needed was professional legal advice to protect myself from family members who valued my money more than my autonomy. The irony is that if they had simply respected my right to make decisions about my own assets, they would have inherited substantial wealth and maintained loving relationships with their mother and grandmother. Instead, their greed cost them everything they claimed to want to protect. They lost their inheritance, their employment, their reputations, and their family relationships because they could not accept that my success belonged to me rather than to them. Emma is 10 years old now, and during our rare visits, she sometimes asks about the family troubles that have shaped her young life. I tell her that people sometimes make choices that hurt the people they love, and that money can make people behave in ways they later regret. "Will you forgive them someday, Grandma?" she asked during our last visit. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt, I told her. Forgiveness is about choosing not to let anger control your life. I forgave your daddy and your aunts a long time ago, but forgiveness doesn't mean allowing people to continue hurting you. She nodded with the solemnity of a child trying to understand adult complexities. "I think you're very brave, Grandma." "Why do you think that, sweetheart?" "Because you chose to help sick kids instead of keeping all your money, even when it made everyone mad at you." Out of the mouths of babes, Emma understood something that her father and aunts never could: that true strength lies not in accumulating wealth, but in using that wealth to make the world a better place. As I finish writing this account, I feel no regret about the choices I made. My children had every opportunity to support my charitable goals while maintaining loving family relationships. They chose money over love, inheritance over respect, and manipulation over honesty. Those choices led inevitably to the consequences they now face. I have learned that family is not defined by blood alone, but by mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. The employees of Caldwell Industries, the beneficiaries of the Caldwell Foundation, and the few friends who understood my decisions from the beginning have become my chosen family. They have shown me more loyalty and affection than my biological children ever did. The professional care my children thought I needed turned out to be exactly what I received: professional legal advice that protected my interests and exposed their true motivations. The professional legal advice I sought saved me from years of continued manipulation and ensured that my life's work would benefit people who truly deserved help. Sometimes the hardest choice is also the right choice. Sometimes protecting yourself requires disappointing people who claim to love you. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to stop enabling their worst impulses, even when they're your own children. My legacy is not the money I accumulated, but the lives I touched and the positive changes I made possible. That legacy cannot be inherited, challenged in court, or taken away by ungrateful children. It belongs to the sick children who received life-saving treatment, the students who achieved their dreams through education, and the communities that were strengthened by compassionate action. That is the legacy I chose, and I would choose it again without hesitation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.